Just an overview of what we're going to cover in the next probably 60 minutes, aiming to be finished by around 7. So we'll talk a bit about what an out-of-programme opportunity is, what sorts of opportunities are out there for oncology trainees, how you might go about arranging this, and hopefully signpost you to some more info. We have some trainee presentations. So all of us are members of the ACP Trainees Committee, and geographically we're quite spread out. Ali and Karim will be doing the first sort of half of the session on research academic opportunities, and then myself, Ella, and Sophie will be covering between us leadership and career breaks. Just to introduce myself, my name's Ella. I'm one of the ACP Trainee Committee members, and I'm an SC5 Med-Onc in Severn, currently working in Bath. Just before we start going into trainee experience, I'll just briefly talk about what an UP is. I use the term UP to refer to any out-of-programme opportunity just because it's less of a mouthful. I appreciate some of you might be at the start of your training and haven't even started thinking about it yet. So we'll cover some of the basics and then we'll go on to the kind of more interesting stuff. So what is it? Well, time out of programme is planned, formally approved time where you're outside of your training programme, but you retain your national training number. So you're still on track to CCT in your specialty. If you're considering an out of programme opportunity, you need to talk to your educational supervisor and TPD as early as possible, really, even just to verbalise informally that you want to do something. And then in order to formalise this, you need to submit an application form for approval by NHS England. In terms of policies, submission timelines and application forms, this will vary geographically depending on what region you're in. So I'd recommend checking your deanery website to check for specific timelines. This is an example from the London and South East deanery, where for each planned rotation, they give a out of programme application window that you need to meet in order to not rotate at that time and come out of programme. So this is 6 months. GMC recommends a minimum of 3 months that you need to apply for your UP before coming out of training, but it will vary depending on where you are. Where I am, it's around 4 months. When can you take an UP? Well, it's quite varied, usually not in the first 3 months of your training or in the final year when you're on track to CCT, but this can vary. And I definitely know trainees that have come out of programme in their final year and in exceptional circumstances for the right opportunity. So it needs to be discussed locally with your training programme director and postgraduate dean. Usually the GMCs say that you can do maximum 3 years out of your training programme in total. That doesn't count being out of training for other reasons like parental leave. But this can vary, so there is some flexibility, and I certainly know people who have done 3 years out doing a PhD and then had another really good opportunity come their way and had another 1 year out later. So again, just needs discussion locally with training programme director and postgraduate dean to see what's allowed. One thing to note is that whilst you are out of programme, there are still some ARCP forms that you need to do to keep your national training number. One of them is your Form R, and the other is an out of programme report. It's not too much work, but it is a requirement if you're going out of programme that you need to be able to maintain those requirements to keep your number in the background. So there are 5 different categories that we're going to talk about. So I'll talk about them one by one. So OOP-T is out of programme for training, and this is where some or all of the experience that you do can count towards your training, and therefore your CCT date isn't pushed backwards. If you want to do this, you need prospective GMC approval before you go out of programme. You can't do an OOP and then ask, can I have that time taken off my training? This is for clinical training, which isn't part of your training programme, and usually it's a maximum of 1 year, but occasionally 2 years in exceptional circumstances. I'm doing an OOP-T at the moment, so I'll talk about a bit more about that later. An OOP is an out of programme experience, so that's what most people use the term OOP, but that's just this one kind of category out of 5. It doesn't actually count towards your training, so it's done in addition to your training programme, which Med-Onc is obviously 4 years. And it's usually 1 year, but it can be extended to 2 years with agreement from the postgraduate dean. So again, just lots of conversations with your local team. An OOP-R or OOP research is probably what's been done most commonly in medical oncology to date, with a lot of trainees wanting to go out of programme for research opportunities. And this is where you might undertake a higher degree, like an MD or a PhD. The GMC says sometimes it can be recognised to count towards training, but to be honest, in my experience, often not. I might let Ali and Karim comment on that a little more, but Med-Onc is 4 years, it's already quite short. You need to be able to make all your curriculum requirements and tumour site time. So often, if you took 2 or 3 years out to do an MD or a PhD, that would be completely separate to your training. And usually an UPAR is for up to 3 years. However, this can sometimes be extended beyond that, depending on local processes. An oopsie is a career break, and this is where you come out of training to pursue other interests or priorities. And Sophie is going to talk a little bit about this in more detail at the end. I think it's probably one of the less common out of program experiences that I've come across, but it's actually a really interesting and important one to talk about. Reasons for taking an oopsie might be, childcare, caring responsibilities, work in other industries like pharmaceutical companies, developing talents in other areas, going off to do something exciting at the Olympics. The applications are considered on a one-by-one basis, and usually this doesn't exceed 1 year. And the final category is an OOP, which is a pause, where this is time to step out of your formal training, maybe because of personal or professional circumstances, which is usually up to a year. And you can actually have your competencies and experience gained during this year assessed on your return, which may or may not lead to you having that count towards your training. Sophie's going to talk a little bit later about the difference between things like OOP, OOP-C, and OOP-E. Just to note that if you did take a post outside of the UK, that it's really important that you maintain your GMC registration and you don't give it up, because maintaining your GMC reg is mandatory to keep your training number to come back to. So in terms of references, there's a few websites here. Firstly, the GMC has some out-of-program guidance. Secondly, the Gold Guide is really helpful. There's an appendix on out-of-program opportunities. On the ACP trainee website, we have a page on both non-research based and research based opportunities. Both of these need updating, and if by all means you ever have any interesting experiences, please contact us if you'd like to share. And finally, I'd really recommend looking at your local deanery website, as they'll have lots of information on opportunities, timelines, application forms, and policies. For the next part of the talk, I'm going to hand over to Alistair, who's going to talk about academic research opportunities. And Ali, just let me know whenever you want me to move on.
That's great. Thanks, Ella. I'm Ali. I'm a ST5 up in Glasgow in Scotland, who's just come back from doing their PhD and is currently writing it up. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about out-of-program research opportunities. I think the first thing to say is a research background is not mandatory for either applying to medical oncology, either training or consultancy. Medical oncology is strongly linked to a career in research or academia in many people's minds, but it's not required to CCT. In some regions, it might make you more competitive for consultant positions. That's not necessarily the only reason to do it, though. And in your training as a medical oncologist, you're going to be able to contribute to cancer research. And the idea is that you'll be able to lead phase 3 trials locally as principal investigators as part of your training. Which is, if you just click, sorry, Ella, which is a sort of key thing in a specific medical oncology CIP as part of the curriculum. Okay, next slide, please. So everyone has this idea about this academic pathway. If you don't get on at the start, you're never going to be able to be an academic. That's not true at all. If we just click through, I didn't do MB PhD, I didn't do academic foundation, I didn't do an academic fellowship. I essentially went in as a registrar at the stage of gaining a clinical fellowship and now a clinical lectureship. Who knows what's coming after that, basically. And so if we just move on, sorry, thank you. My pathway, essentially, I did an intercalated BSc. I didn't do MB PhD. I didn't do academic foundation. I decided I wanted to see what oncology was about post F2. So I did a kind of an FY3 in the Royal Free in oncology, then moved up to the west of Scotland to do CT1 and 2, didn't do any academic fellowship, then did a trials fellowship, which was a kind of a local position, and then have been an ST3 onwards and taken 3 years out to do a PhD as part of the TRACK program, which is a kind of Scotland specific PhD clinical research fellow program. And that's where I am now. Next slide, please. So I think if you are thinking about applying for a research out program at OOPR, usually it's going to be for either an MD or a PhD. Sometimes people do it for master's degrees as well, but I think usually it's going to be either the 2 years for an MD or 3 years for the PhD. So I think you need to think about how long you want to take out. If you are less than full time, you can take out pro rata time as well. So for example, if you work 80%, you can take longer than 3 years without getting extra approval to do your PhD because you're doing it less than full time. I think you need to think about where the funding for your research is going to come from. Research, particularly wet lab research, is expensive, and you won't really be able to get anything done unless there's money behind what you're doing. So you may have a wonderful project with the best idea in the world, the best supervisor in the world, but if there's no money to do that, you're not going to get anywhere. So some programs will come with some funding for research with them, but usually that's not always going to be enough to cover what you want to do. So it's important to think about that. Salary, you need to get paid. It's important to think about where that's coming from. Again, a lot of these integrated clinical fellowship programs come with salary included, but particularly if you're looking at an alternative source of funding, you need to think about what's going to cover your salary. PhD students and even postdocs are paid a lot less than clinicians are. So it's something to think about, whether you need, if you're not getting a clinical research fellowship, whether you take that pay cut to do your out of program. You need to register with a university and pay tuition fees as well. So if you are going down a route where you're providing the funding yourself, you're going to need to cover that as well. And that can be fairly expensive. We're sort of talking about £9,000 a year or so. So there's a lot of costs associated with this. So it's something to really, really think about if you are thinking about doing an OPR. But I think the most important thing to think about is, what project do you want to do? Where is it in the UK? Whose lab is it in, or whose research group is it in? And what is it that you want to do in your project? If you just click, please, Ella. Everyone thinks that research is kind of very much focused on basic science, going back to the lab or going to the lab for the first time, looking at mice, looking at cells in a dish. But actually, there's a huge range of things that you can do as an out-of-program researcher that fits somewhere else on the clinical translational research spectrum there. I know people that have done PhDs looking at what the impact of clinical trials are. So much more sort of like the T3 there, translation into practice. I know people that are doing big data epidemiological PhDs as part of their out-of-program research. There's lots of different options. Don't think that research is just basic science. There will be something out there for you that you would be interested in if it is something you're pursuing. Next slide, please. This is from the ICR page on application, and actually I think it's specific for them, but it's also a really good way to think about what to do when you're thinking about going out of program for research. So what I'd say is, if you are thinking of doing it, start getting in touch with people who you would want to work with. Most universities will have web pages where you can see the researchers that are based at their university and what they do. Have a look at some of the papers they've published to see if it's something that interests you, and then approach them. Just send them an email. Scientists, researchers are always really approachable. They'll get back to you and be interested in what you want to do and what you can bring to their group. And then start to outline a project, start to think about who would supervise that, and develop it a bit further. Even some of these programs that I'll talk about that you're applying before you've even got the funding, or thought about the idea and you develop the idea after you've been awarded the position, it's still good to have an idea of what you want to do and where you want to fit in that clinical research stage. And then at some point, all of these programs are going to have a competitive interview. So you need to prepare for an interview as well. Okay, next, please. And OOPR can take many routes. Now, there is the NIHR program for integrated academic training in England and Wales, not up here. There's academic fellowships and clinical lectureships that they fund in medicine each year. But if you don't get one of these are a national application process that goes through Oriel. They are region specific, but you have to apply nationally. If you don't get one of these, it doesn't mean that you can't go out of program to do research. And actually, in the vast majority of cases, this integrated academic training does not provide funding for you to do a PhD. So you need to find funding to do a PhD and do your out of program research anyway. Really, this is just a route into getting you into academic training and getting a taste for it. So don't despair if you've applied for this and didn't get it. Next slide, please. So in terms of where the money, where to do these PhDs comes from, largely the most common routes to go down is probably funding by a research body or charities. So these are kind of the big four in the UK that fund clinical research, excuse me, training programs. So you've got the MRC, which is the UK Research Institute, you've got the Wellcome Trust, you've got CRUK, and then you've got the National Institute for Health and Care Research. These all have specific applications that are tailored to how these charities or research bodies want to run them. Some of them are national applications, some of them are local applications. For example, next slide, please. These are the ones that are available through CRUK. So they call this a clinical academic training program. They give you research training fellowships and fund a PhD. They also fund MD PhDs as well. And to apply for these, you actually apply to the centre that you want to work in. So if you wanted to work at if you wanted to work in Manchester, you'd apply to the Manchester Centre. If you wanted to work at the Crick, you'd apply to the City of London Centre. If you wanted to work in Glasgow or Edinburgh, you'd apply to the Scotland Centre. And each of those will have their own individual application process. You could actually apply for more than one of them if you wanted to, and you were prepared to move. The only requirement for these usually is that you hold a national training number at the time that you come out of program to do your research. Okay, next slide, please. There are alternatives though. If you're not successful in getting awarded funding by one of those bodies, there are other ways to do it. Some places have local PhD schemes. For example, in Scotland, there's something called the Chief Scientific Officer. They fund people within Scotland to do research in Scotland. They're a Scottish-based research body. If you wanted to come to Scotland, you could apply there, but you'd need to be doing your research in Scotland. Have a look around local charities as well. For example, where I work in Glasgow, the Beatson is the big cancer centre. There's a Beatson Cancer Charity. I know people that have had PhDs funded by the Beatson Cancer Charity. There's also disease-specific charities. For example, the Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation does fund people who are doing lung cancer specific research. You need to apply through them as well. And there's other charities that will do that as well. And actually there's people that have kind of, if they're really interested, they cobble together funding from different charity sources. So I know someone who did a PhD that was partially funded by the Lung Cancer Foundation, partially funded by the Beatson Cancer Charity, and then partially funded by a mesothelioma charity as well, because they were looking at mesothelioma. And then another potential route is actually a collaborative PhD with the pharmaceutical industry. And that involves an industry partner who will provide part of the funding for you to do that. And actually, it's kind of quite an interesting hybrid because quite a lot of people will do research in a university as well as industry as part of that PhD. So there are options out there. If you don't get off one of these national schemes or internet, there's still ways of doing a PhD if you're really interested. I would say for these alternative schemes, you probably have to be quite dedicated with a really good project already in mind and supervision already in place to be able to apply for these. Whereas some of for example, the CRUK one in Scotland, you work up your project after you've already been awarded the funding. Excuse me, next slide, please. I put this link in. This is a good resource provided by the, MRC, essentially thinking about doing research now, program research, thinking about preparing your proposal, thinking about preparing for interview. These are all really good resources that you can watch, hopefully through that link on YouTube. Okay, next slide, please. And then finally, this is just what the Gold Guide actually says about time out of program for research. I think the things to highlight is generally you have to be beyond foundation training. So during your specialist training in medical oncology, it's a great time to do it. You still have to do ARCP. You're meant to return once you finish your research. If the curriculum includes research as an optional element, it can count towards your time spent in training. This isn't the case with the curriculum in medical oncology, as far as I'm aware. So everyone I know who's done a PhD or an MD, it's not counted towards their training, so they need to complete it when they get back. Um, Essentially, 3 years is usually a ceiling. You'd have to apply to get longer. Now, most PhDs are that basic scientists do are 4 years in total, so you are abbreviating the process somewhat. So it is tougher. It is harder work to be able to produce a body of work for a thesis in 3 years than 4 years, but it's still doable. And then the other thing is this bit sort of bottom right about retaining a clinical element. I think that's certainly something to think about doing when you're out of program and research. I carried on doing on calls and I carried on doing a clinic a week in early phase clinical trials, which is an opportunity we have up here. I think it's good to keep your hand in, particularly in a fast moving specialty like medical oncology. I've come back. I haven't done lung cancer for 5 years. I'm now doing it and everything's changed. So I'm catching up. But having had some of that clinical experience, particularly in acute situations on call, has at least meant that I'm not jumping right back in when I've got other time pressures on, like writing up my thesis. So yeah, I think it's a good idea to stay in clinical practice whilst you're doing your PhD if you can. Okay, and that's me. Thank you. If you've got any questions about this, happy to take them on email because I'm on call, so I have to drop off in a wee bit. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ali. If anyone's got any questions, please do post them in the chat. Otherwise, I will hand over to Karim for some more stuff about research experience.
Hey everybody. So for those of you that haven't met me before, I'm Karim and I am I've just started a PhD based in Edinburgh and I am an ST5, ST6, I don't really know what I am, but in medical oncology in Edinburgh now. So I'm not going to labour the points Ali's kind of gone over, but you guys know out of program researchers multiple opportunities. It's all very different. And that's as funding is the same. It's meant to say funding is not the same. You get fellowship funding, you get this thing called soft funding, which Ali's kind of mentioned. Are you fully funded? Are you partly funded? Are there on-call supplements? Like all of these things are things that you kind of have to think about. But to be honest with you, your supervisors really are the ones that will be able to guide you in that, and they'll be the ones who are able to kind of support you. And not only your PhD supervisors, but actually mentors within your cancer center, academic consultants in the cancer center who know all of this stuff and they want to help you and that's important that you reach out to them. And you add a program research opportunities. Ali's talked a lot about PhD, a lot about MD, but actually they can also be like non-degree focused opportunities. Now, I'll briefly touch on them at the end of my talk. Next slide, Ella. Thank you. But I think, to be honest with you, this is the like, if you can't laugh at yourself, who can you laugh at, right? And I think that my pathway to get into a PhD was far from typical, and I think it's far more healthy to learn about the challenges that people have than learn about the people that sail through it first opportunity, because actually it makes you realize. So I can kind of share all the things that I wish I'd done or that I learned. So the first time that I applied for two different schemes in Edinburgh. One's called TRACK, which is actually what Ali is on because it's split between Edinburgh and Glasgow. One is called ECAT, which is Edinburgh Clinical Academic Track, I think. And here I am, bright-eyed, thinking, oh, I'm going to, take over the world. I'm going to do a PhD. Everything's going to be great. How hard can it be? I applied for both of them, had an interview with both of them. Both of them I was rejected. And the feedback for both of them was exactly the same. You don't know what you want to do. I wanted to do wet lab, dry lab, trials and everything. And I thought if I just say yes to everything in the interview, they're going to be like, oh, great, you'll do whatever. But actually, this feedback, which I took quite harshly at the time, but actually was probably one of the most valuable bits of feedback I ever had, was you don't know what you want to do. You need to go away and think about what your project is going to look like, how valuable it's going to be. So having applied for those two, went away, had to think about, do I like dry lab? Do I like wet lab? Blah, blah, blah. And then left it for the rest of the year. And then applied again at ST4, hit the ground running, was having a mega open mind and thought, why don't I apply for Edinburgh? Why don't I apply for London, where I'd been before, and see what happens? So I applied for the Crick. And I had an old colleague who was really, really very supportive and was based at the Crick and gave me a whole load of support. And I applied for it, tried to meet my supervisor beforehand. I was rejected before interview. I tried on multiple opportunities to arrange to go and view the lab even before I applied and meet the team. Didn't happen. PA just kept on not replying to me. So that was that. So I put all that effort in for an application, didn't come to anything. Um, so fine, chin up, just keep going. So I applied for the ICR Imperial Fellowships, which is actually the screenshot that Ali showed you earlier, where they post a whole lot of different programs, and you essentially reach out to the supervisor, you have a chat with them, and then you put in this very early form, which is like a preference form, where you say, these are my preferences of projects that I would like to do. And then your supervisor, all the supervisors do the same, and essentially they match you to different supervisors depending on who wants to work with who, essentially. And I got matched with a really great supervisor. We pulled together this big project grant, like 18 pages or something, submitted it, then got an email in January saying, great, the interviews will be on whatever date, pending shortlisting. Didn't really think anything of them saying about shortlisting. They'd already given me an interview date. We'd been having discussions about, like, how would I travel there? Are they going to be online? Blah, 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 because I was based in Scotland. So didn't really think about it. And then 6 days before the interview, got an email saying, shortlisting hasn't happened yet. We'll let you know. 5 days before interview, got an email saying, you can't interview. You've not been shortlisted. So after all of that, it didn't really work out. SD4, I was really quite lucky, managed to get some kind of soft funding through drug companies to do a project at UCL, and it all looked good, looked like it was going to go ahead. Ella, next slide. Thank you. And then that fell through after like probably a year of, oh, the money's coming, the money's coming. This certain drug company is restructuring, they're reviewing everything, it'll be fine, it will work out. It was linked to a trial, fell through. So SD5, I reapplied for track, didn't get it. SD5, I then applied for two different things. One with the CSO fellowship that Ali mentioned, which is the kind of Scotland equivalent of the NIHR. And the next one is an MRC drug development fellowship, which is based out of Glasgow, Liverpool, Manchester, and Bath. And actually, I'd really, really recommend that people Google that and have a look, because it's mega interesting. It's a really good scheme. It's a joint scheme between pharma and academia. And next slide, Ella. Eventually, at long last, got a CSO fellowship, and then got rejected for the MRC one, and then sort of accepted because a drug company kind of found some money for me, but that was kind of too late by this point, and I'd already accepted the CSO fellowship. So at long last, like 7 applications later, eventually got something. Next slide, Ella. And if I could go back through every single application and think about the top things that I would recommend for people, the first one would be make your intentions known really early and find mentors. So even in your ST3 year, even in your core training year, wherever you are, whatever cancer center you're working in, find those people that are going to support you. I had a really great group of very academic consultants, both at UCL and at Edinburgh, and who I'm still in really good contact with. I kind of let them know that this is what I wanted to do, and they were really good at kind of helping me get there, supporting me to find things, putting me in contact with people if they didn't know. And actually, I found that really, really valuable. So even if you're not applying in ST3 or whenever, make sure people know that you're thinking about it. And then when you are ready to start applying, start applying. Start applying as early as you can. And the one thing that I didn't, well, I think I did quite a lot of, but I almost did more of and didn't, which was cast a wide net. Keep applying, keep applying, keep applying for things. Because I had this kind of tentative PhD, the funding wasn't coming through, and I was like, should I be applying for other things? What if I apply and I get it and then I'll be stuck? And then what will I say to one? What will I say to another? I was getting in my head about it. Just apply, because actually until you have something in your hand, you don't have anything. So make sure that you cast a wide net, keep your opportunities open. The other thing I wish I had known, and actually I forgot to put in there, was I also applied for London ACF post, which I didn't get. And at that time I was like, oh, it's great, I'll get a PhD out of that as well. Everything will be fine. Doesn't include PhD funding, which I didn't appreciate at all. So although you get dedicated time to do research, you don't have PhD funding built into it. So you will have to find PhD funding alongside that. The most valuable thing I'm going to tell you is probably that pilot work is good. I didn't do any pilot work with any of my applications. What I probably should have done from the very beginning was find one supervisor and one project and apply for things. And if I didn't get it, I stick with that supervisor I work with them in whatever extra time that I have to build up some pilot work that I've personally done, and then you reapply to a different scheme with that project because it shows that you're committed to the project, you're committed to the supervisor, and you have started doing things already to kind of get things moving. And I think if I could go back, instead of having done like what 4 or 5 different grant applications and then only used one, I wish I'd probably just done that and stuck with it. Next slide, Ella. The other thing I would mention, which is kind of works quite well with your PPI work and with your pilot work, is PPI, so patient public involvement, is increasingly relevant to applications. My CSO application, when I did it, they wanted to know, how has PPI been involved in the development of this project? How have I personally been involved in PPI related to this project? And how is PPI going to be relevant moving forward? And I'm pretty sure that my MRC grant said was something similar, and maybe even my ICR one mentioned it. I can't remember. But essentially, you need to make sure that you're thinking about that early, and all of that fits in because they will ask you about it in an interview, even if you've not mentioned it, and making sure that you're well prepared is essential. And that comes back to your mentors. Speak to your mentors, ask loads of people for advice and interview prep, etc., even if they're not in any way related to what you're applying to, because they will have experience and they'll be able to help you. And I mentioned before about kind of casting a wide net and applying to things. And what I meant by that is applying to things that you want to do. Don't apply to everything if you're not prepared to do it, because 3 years is a long time and it's going to be a hard slog. So don't just apply to something because you really, really want to do a PhD and you think it will be really important for your career, and therefore you'll do anything, because if you're going to have a miserable 3 years, you're probably not going to excel at it and you're probably not going to enjoy it. And my last point is, at the time, well, the multiple times I was like tearing my hair out about it, thinking, oh my God, and what am I going to happen? I'm not going to get something, blah, blah, blah. And I really wanted to do one. People kept saying, you can do one after CCT, it'll be fine. I think you have to be really cautious about that, because the majority of funding nowadays is through fellowships. So CRUK, NIHR, MRC, etc. And often they have a requirement that you need to have a training number and you need to have not CCT'd. So unless you have a clear idea of how you would fund a post-CCT PhD, be careful when people say that, because they don't really know the ins and outs of what the funding requirements are. Next slide, thank you. But the one thing I would say as well is that not everything is about PhD, right? So times are changing, and I spoke to a really great mentor that I used to work with at UCL when I didn't know what I was going to do, and she had said that, although opinions are slow to change, actually job requirements are changing already. A PhD is not essential anymore for many big academic centres, especially if you don't want to be doing a job that is going to have huge amounts of academic time. So working as a consultant with involvement in leadership, management, trials, none of these things require a PhD. And I think that as money is getting tighter and it's getting harder to get a PhD, the job descriptions are going to have to change, right? Because how will we recruit if we're only looking for people with PhDs or MDs? My second point is follow your interests. So plan out a program opportunity around what is most useful for you to achieve your future aims. If you know you want to be a trialist, you know that's going to be really important to you, and you don't really have any interest in the the really kind of intense science behind it, then do a trials fellowship, right? Like you'll get loads more out of that in a practical way than you probably would a PhD. And I hope that you'll see my time as a bit of a testament, but if you just keep applying, if you really want it, everything will work out. So just keep going with it and keep applying. Last slide, I think, Keller. Perfect. And then I just thought I'd highlight these because I kind of looked into these quite a lot when I didn't really know what was going to happen. And there are loads of really, really great schemes out there. So one of them is the CRU Clinical Trials Fellowship. So loads of big centres with clinical trials units. So I'm pretty sure Southampton have one. UCL definitely have one. And I'm pretty sure the Marsden has one. And these are funded trial fellowships up to 3 years, funded by CRUK, and you basically, I think they're advertised directly through the university, so you'd apply through the Marsden or through UCL for these fellowship opportunities, and they're kind of working in early phase trials and big clinical trials, and that's your dedicated time to do that, and it means you get proper hands-on skills about being a PI and how you get trials to your centre and what that entails, etc. And even if trials isn't your interest, but you have other interests that are research related, there are loads of like clinical fellowships going around. So, a really good friend of mine who's I can see on this call actually has just started a cellular therapy fellowship at UCL, and I'm pretty sure there's also multiple of these all over the place. There are loads of early phase trial fellowships that are not CO UK funded. There's loads of things you can do that are not research based, that are very practical, and they give you some opportunities. And last point is that although I'd said, careful of funding post CCT for a research degree, that doesn't mean that there aren't loads of post CCT fellowships that you can do if things don't work out. And I think we're kind of behind the curve with this compared to clinics. Like, it's really normal for clinics to go and do a post CCT fellowship in Canada, in Australia, and then they come back to the centre that they've trained in. And actually, lots of them seem to get the jobs that they wanted, and they're better equipped having done a fellowship. So really, why is the same not for us? I know the Christie's got some really good post CCT fellowships. I'm sure there are some in London as well. I'm not sure about Glasgow. We don't have many in Edinburgh, but they're all over the place. So keep an eye out and see and work things out. I think that might be me. Yeah. Any questions, feel free to email me on either email or yeah. Cool. Thanks, Ella.
Thanks so much, Karim. Okay, I'm going to change things slightly and talk about leadership opportunities. So depending on where you are geographically, you might not have a vast amount of research opportunities. I know for me, I live in the Southwest. Geographically, I wanted to stay here because I've got a young family. So I wasn't prepared to move to do a PhD, but there are no PhD opportunities in my region. So I did something slightly different and I want to tell you about it today. So I finished today as my last day doing an OOPT, so time out of training as an RCP chief registrar. I've put some pictures in here. So the top middle is a picture of some of the chief regis that were given an award at our final day. Top right is my poster. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Bottom left is the 2024-2025 alumni at our end of year drinks, and then a lovely picture of the Royal College of Physicians in London who hosted us. I've just popped my email there. You're more than welcome to email me or put messages in the chat. So what is the Chief Registrar Programme? So it's open to all specialties, including non-physicians. So I met anaesthetists, GPs, O&G, loads of surgeons, psychiatrists. So although it's run out of RCP, it doesn't have to be a medical specialty. What they do say is you need to be minimum ST4 plus, I think with the exception of GP, obviously. And it's a post that you do for a minimum of 12 months. And that involves a 10-month programme at the RCP, including teaching days as well as the post-presentation day. They stipulate that doctors in training must have 40 to 50% of their time in work protected for chief reg activities. And you can do this either in programme as an OOPT or an OOP-E. Now, I said earlier, medonc is already quite short in 4 years. I've not met any medoncs that have succeeded doing the whole thing in programme, especially when you've got potentially 2 or 3 days a week of non-clinical time. I did it as an OOP-T, so I counted half of my time towards my training. I've also had colleagues and friends do it as an OOP, so it's really quite varied and I guess depends on your individual needs. The RCP say that chief regis will gain aptitude and confidence as senior leaders, achieve a deeper understanding of their own and other styles, and have the technical knowledge and skills to lead QI. And I think I have actually achieved all 3 of those over the year when I reflected doing these slides earlier. I'd recommend having a look at the Chief Registrar Programme page on the RCP website. There's a whole heap of information there. In terms of timelines and what you need to do if you're thinking that there's something that might suit you well, firstly, I'd say, is there an existing Chief Registrar post that you would like to apply for? That might be in your trust, in your region, it might even be further afield. And the way you can check that is if you look at the Chief Reg website, they often have a list of host organisations, or just by talking to people. So in my region, a lot of our trainees know that there is a chief reg post at one of the hospitals. So I knew that there was something that I wanted to apply for. If that's a yes, then it's quite straightforward. You just wait for the post to be advertised. All the actual application, the recruitment and the interview process is all done locally, and then you're employed as a locally employed doctor. So deadlines are decided at trust level, but usually around mid-June is when applications will close. That varies, so obviously reach out to your organisation. If there isn't, then that doesn't mean to say you can't pave the way. So one of my colleagues and friends thought that she would really like to be a chief registrar in the RUH where I work, and she paved the way. She approached the RUH. She said, how would you feel about a chief oncology registrar? And she helped them with this expression of interest form. For that, you need to get engagement from senior leadership and finance, because it costs the trust over £4,000 per chief reg, plus potentially some or all of your salary. So you need to get lots of people involved and for them to see the value in having a chief reg. And that needs kind of various approvals. And the deadline for NHS organisations to express their interest in having a chief reg is around March. It was the 3rd of March this year. After that, the RCP then allocate places. So this isn't a guarantee that you would then get a chief reg job, but you can kind of help potentially move things along. Equally, I know colleagues who have tried to do this at Trust where a chief reg would be really helpful and have just been unable to get this past finance because of the costs involved. So it's worth doing, but it might not be a guarantee. If you then go through the advertisement recruitment process and you are appointed, then your start of post is usually sometime between August and October. Locally, we rotate in April and October, so I started post October last year. The Chief Reg programme that the RCP run, the teaching days start in September, so just be aware of that. So I attended a couple of teaching days before I went out of programme, but that was something I knew about in advance. Most importantly, before you start any of this process, put yourself out there, reach out to supervisors, recruiting trusts, speak to current chief registrars. I've had people approach me that say I'd potentially be interested in doing your job as an UP in a couple of years' time. Just lay your cards on the table and let people know that you're interested, because it costs to put jobs out to advert. And when you're talking about a chief reg in oncology, it's quite niche. You're not necessarily going to get loads of applicants. So, the trust may only recruit if they think that there's a willing and suitable candidate. I think this year there was at least 5 of us, 5 medoncs that did chief reg job across the country. So they are out there, but they're not common. So just talk to people. And then your salary funding depends whether you're in programme or out of programme. So for example, I'm out of programme, so I'm employed as a locally employed doctor. And I'll talk a little bit more about my timetable in a sec. That's just a link about recruiting organisations and contacts. So this page has kind of consultant contacts for who's the lead for recruiting at each site that you could reach out to and say, can I apply as a medical or clinical oncology trainee? So what does my job involve? So I am doing this as an UPT. I'm already an 80% trainee, so Fridays are my non-working day. And then the remainder of my time is split. So I do 40% chief registrar, 40% clinical work. And my clinical work I'm counting towards my training. So for the last 6 months, I've been on gynae. As you can see, Mondays and Wednesdays are my gynae days, and Tuesdays and Thursdays are my chief reg day. And it isn't always that straightforward. There's naturally some spillover one into the other, but broadly, that's how I keep things. And then what do I do on my chief reg days? Well, I was, I guess, fortunate to have a complete blank slate where nobody had any preconceived ideas about what they wanted me to do. People had suggestions, but I wasn't handed projects on a plate. And that was an interesting learning exercise in itself, because I was completely new to the trust, never worked there before. And then I had to find what I thought the issues were and work on kind of service development projects to improve them. But broadly, over the course of the year, I've attended and contributed to departmental and divisional meetings, which has given me a lot of insight into trust management structures, trust finances, budgets, etc. I've been involved in a lot of education in different capacities. I've obviously done a lot of quality improvement, both myself and supervising others. And mainly my interest has been around improving the efficiency and capacity of our SACT unit, but also our blood testing pathways. I've been doing specifically some cisplatin prehydration work, some coding work, and looking at artificial intelligence within clinic to improve efficiency of letters. And then other kind of leadership hats. So I've co-chaired the RDF. I've been on a respect and resuscitation working group to try and minimize risk. I've sat on the IMT interview panel. I've organized regional training days. So it's really been quite varied, and everyone's experience on the Chief Reg programme is completely different. In addition to your day-to-day activities, there are 10 teaching days arranged by the RCP, which can be done in London, Liverpool, virtual, or a combination. I was in the virtual cohort, but everyone has to go for the first and the last day to London, which is really nice to meet everyone. And the last day is a kind of poster presentation day. You need to attend at least 8 of the 10 days in order to get the certificate that says that you were a chief registrar for a year. Yeah, I'm conscious that there are other opportunities out there. So I had from my own experience and speaking to others and from my quick Google today, I just wanted to whiz through some other things which you may or may not be aware of. So firstly, there is the FMLM National Medical Directors Clinical Fellow Scheme that's been running now almost 15 years. I applied for this back in F3 and got rejected before interview. I think it is quite a competitive scheme, but it looks incredible. And it's 12 months where you're completely removed from your clinical environment and you spend that outside of that environment in a healthcare affiliated organisation. So examples include NHS England, CQC, GMC, private companies like Bupa, Deloitte. It's quite you have to start quite early. So applications are usually in the winter around Christmas time, ready to start in the September. So if this is something you're interested in, you need to look about a year in advance to get a feel for whether or not it's something you can do. But having looked at it, it looks amazing. I would absolutely love to do it. There's also, on a similar theme, the FMLM run another clinical fellow scheme, which is a Chief Sustainability Officer scheme. And this is a 12-month post where you are basically working towards a greener NHS with net carbon zero principles, and it involves a lot of senior leadership engagement. This is open to not just doctors. There's all sorts of healthcare professionals can apply, so just kind of be aware of that. But it still looks really good, and I think there's quite a lot of clinicians that have come through this route. AI fellowships, which I think are becoming increasingly relevant in oncology. I think clinics are definitely utilising the most of these opportunities. But there's an NHS fellowship in clinical AI. It's definitely worth a Google. It's an integrated programme alongside clinical work, a bit like the RCP scheme. And they have waves of applications, so they don't just recruit once a year. There's another cohort that's opening in November. So if you're potentially interested in AI, which to be honest, we're probably all going to have to be in our careers, I'd really recommend having a look at their website in time for November. Just a note on local fellowships. So depending on where you work, there are often kind of deanery funded local fellowships where you may be able to take a proportion or all of your time out of training to pursue leadership themed opportunities. So one example would be a support fellow where you're assisting doctors returning to training after time out. Many trusts and deaneries have leadership, simulation, education, digital, EDI, well-being fellowship. So look on your deanery website, talk to your TPD, talk to other non-oncology trainees, because often these things are open to any kind of registrar grade and above. But have a look at that, particularly if like me, you don't have absolutely loads of research opportunities or academics in your region, which we definitely don't. And finally, you can just design your own out of program experience. You don't have to apply to a set scheme. You can pave the way. Obviously, that will come with its own challenges of how you get funding, but you talk to people. Trusts may be willing to cobble together some funding for a locally employed doctor if you have something really interesting in mind that you want to do. I'm going to hand over to Sophie for the final section about career breaks, and then we'll go to a Q&A.
Thanks, Ella. Hi, everyone. My name's Sophie. I am a medical oncology trainee in South London, and I've just started my OOPC. So I've just finished my ST3 and I'll be going back as an ST4. What I'm going to cover today is a bit about what an OOPC is, as it's a bit of a different OOP that you may not have heard of, and what the differences are between that and an OOP-E and an OOP-Pause. How to apply, that's what the main bulk of this section is on, just because there's a lot of forms. And just a personal example, I don't know if I should put that in, but I might just mention at the end. Next slide, please. So what is an OOPC? An OOPC is an OOP career break. It is a planned break that is for personal reasons, and you can retain your national training number on return. So an example of that might be having time off for family responsibilities, for health reasons, for personal development, such as just enhancing hobbies, skills that you might have, traveling, using it as a bit of a gap year, or pursuing other talents that you might have, hobbies, like I said. So there's loads of different examples. So I won't go through each because everyone might have a different reason for doing it. But the main thing with this OOP is that it does not count towards your CCT. and you must have completed at least 12 months of training before you can apply. So that's what I did. I did my ST3 and then I applied. Then I started my OOP-C. So it's different from an OOP pause, because with an OOP pause, you are pausing your training program, but doing a non-training NHS post. So for example, you might do sort of a fellowship or something that is related to medicine or unrelated to medicine. It could be something like industry, for example, but it will not count towards your CCT. So it's like almost a bit similar to an experience. And then an experience, the names are quite confusing, is to gain some sort of an experience for yourself, such as going to work for a charity abroad, or like a global health initiative, for example. And again, that does not count towards CCT. And Ella's also mentioned an OOP experience. So those are the sort of main differences. We can send you these slides as well if you'd like to reflect on them a bit more. Next slide, please. So again, some examples in pictures here. So I'm using it as a little bit of a sort of a gap year. So you can go traveling, you can use it to take care of yourself, enhance your hobbies, spend time with family. If you've had some mental health struggles, you can use it to focus on yourself in that year. So there's lots of different reasons why people might do it. Next slide, please. So general advice on taking an OOP-C is to start early, because as I'll talk about, there are lots of different forms that you need to fill in. And like Ella already touched on at the start, there is an application window, so you need to make sure that you apply within that window. Another big thing that I wanted to flag up is about locum work. So you're out of program, you're not doing any clinical work. Essentially, that's what you're applying for, to focus on yourself or doing things that you enjoy. But you can only locum to cover sort of bills, which is a very generalized statement, but you can't go crazy on locuming because that would be a bit unfair. Next slide. So this is just how to apply. So first of all, at the application window, which is on this website here, this link, this is the London one. I think it might be similar for all different deaneries, but you have this support portal, the PGMDE, and it has this OOP window in which you need to apply. So medoncs usually rotate around like September or March, April sort of time, but it might differ based on if you've had time out, and you need to apply in that window. So first of all, check the application window and choose which window that you're going to apply in. And then step 2. Step 2 is to, well, you could use as a step 1 as well, inform your TPD and educational supervisor as soon as you possibly can. Like Ella said, if that's verbal or written down or whatever, just make sure that they are aware so they can sort of plan ahead, because they need to plan who's going to take your slot while you're away, for example. And then you need to write an OOP statement. So for an OOP-C, this is what the application form will show, this bit at the bottom left here. So you need to provide a sort of statement as to what you'll be doing on your OOP-C. Now that I've had a lot of questions about before from others about what you actually write in that. There is no word limit. You can write whatever you want and what your reasons are. No one can question what you write because it's your personal reason. And this can be, this is then submitted to the postgraduate dean, and they will then review this and decide whether it meets the criteria. So even if it doesn't quite fit with an OOP-C, or you're not sure if it might fall into an OOP-E or an OOP pause, the postgraduate dean will then decide which one, and they might come back to you and say, look, this doesn't actually look like an OOP-C, it might be an OOP pause. So we will accept this as an OOP pause. And so don't worry if you're not entirely sure where it fits. So this is the link here on the right where you find the application form. But make sure you start writing your OOP statement early. Again, it doesn't have to be long. It just needs to state why you want to do it. And this needs to be reviewed by your educational supervisor and your TPD. Next slide, please. So then I've made a little checklist on what you need to do with your ES and your TPD. This is what I did for myself because I'm just a bit confused with all the forms. So with your TPD, you need to inform them of your plans for an OOP as soon as possible, and you need to let them review the OOP statement that I just talked about. Then you need to ask them to sign this form, which I've put a link down for. It's called an OOP/acting up signatory form. And that is their signature, which I'll show you in a moment, on a form to say that they've read your OOP statement, they agree that you're, for your reasons for taking it, and that is something that you need to submit alongside your application. Quite similar is the stuff that you need to do with your ES. So you need to inform them of the OOP, you need to show them your OOP statement, and they need to sign the OOP acting up signatory form. But they also need to sign a supported return to training pre-absence form, for which the link is here down below. And that is just to sort of plan what you're going to be doing during your year out and how you can be best supported during your year out. Next slide, please. So this is the OOP signatory form that both your ES and your TPD need to sign. So as you can see here on the left, it's your name, GMC number, the type of OOP you're doing. So I think this also applies for other types of OOP. And then your TPD and your ES need to sign it at the bottom. And it just states that they've seen your signatory form, your OOP application statement. Next slide, please. This is another form that you need to complete with your ES before you come back to training. It's called a pre-absence, this is the pre-absence form that you need to do before you start. And then there's another one that you need to fill in before you come back. Next slide, please, which we'll get to in a minute. So this is the link for the application here down below where the red arrow is. So things to include in the application are your OOP statement, that why you want to do it, the OOP signatory form, so the signatures from your ES and TPD saying they agree with your reasons and have seen your statement. You need to make sure that you've got your latest ARCP, so find that early. And you need to find your national training number, which I struggled to find initially, so make sure you've got that to hand. Then what you do is you await the response from the postgraduate dean, and they will send you an email with the outcome, and then hopefully you can start your OOP-C. Next slide. So this is the pre-return form. So you fill a pre-absence form, so the one before you leave on your OOP, and then you need to fill one in before you come back. And this is all with your educational supervisor. I'm pretty sure you can probably also do it with your TPD, but someone basically needs to discuss with you what you plan to do in your year out and how you can be supported. So for example, if it is for mental health reasons, or if it's for, just enriching your well-being or whatever it is, or taking a gap year, you just need to say what you're going to be doing and how they can best support you on return as well, because you'll have been out of clinical work likely for a whole year. Next slide, please. And here are just some useful links and information. So we've already mentioned the Gold Guide, which there's a link for here, and this PGMDE website, if you are in London, and I think it might also apply for other deaneries, is really helpful, and it has a lot of FAQs. And I would say that you should speak to your educational supervisor and TPD early, like we've mentioned a few times, because especially with an OOP-C, your individual circumstances could sort of alter what they could offer you and how they could support you, and make your year, suit you the best and get the most out of it. Again, I'm very happy to answer any questions about an OOP-C. My email is I haven't written it down, but it's my name, sophie.banerjee1@nhs.net. If you'd like to discuss any reasons for taking an OOP-C or what you might want to do in it, I'm more than happy to help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sophie. Hopefully that will be really useful. I think a lot of people don't realise that it's even an option that they can apply for a career break to do things like a gap year. I mean, I certainly didn't know that.
Yeah.
So we'll have some time now, conscious that it's just gone 7. So we'll have a few minutes to do Q&A if anyone has any questions. Like we've said throughout, you're welcome to email any of us if you want slides or you want to ask us a little bit more about our experiences. One thing to note is that the forms that Sophie shared are for London and South East. They are very similar to the forms that I did, but I would just have a look at your deanery website for specific forms for you, but the actual process of going through the forms is exactly the same no matter where you are. While we're waiting to see if any questions come through, there is another webinar. As many of you may be aware, we try and have these once a month on a Tuesday, and our colleague Harriet is running a webinar on the 21st of October on theranostics, which is the role of nuclear med in oncology. So that's just a date for your diaries if anyone wants to attend. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll just see if any questions come through the chat. Whilst we're looking, can I kick things off? Karim, you briefly mentioned not being sure whether you wanted to do wet lab, dry lab, research. So for those of us who have not done much research at all, can you just talk us through what you mean by both of those things so that it can prompt people having a think about what they want to do?
Sure. So, I mean, my understanding of it is that essentially wet lab work is kind of what you imagine when you think of people in a lab, like in white lab coats, like pipetting into different wells and like culturing cells, growing cell lines. Sometimes people deal with mice work. I feel like less so in clinical PhDs, but not impossible. And you're kind of doing lots of different experiments to get very kind of what's the word? Basic isn't the right word. Like, fundamental discovery biological data to then kind of help inform, things in the future. Whereas dry lab work tends to be a lot more stuff looking at kind of big data sets, looking at bioinformatic purposes. So genomics, transcriptomics, metabolomics, all of that kind of stuff. And then dry lab is also things like cancer informatics, so looking at hundreds and hundreds of clinical cases for clinical data and trying to like analyze things en masse. I think the reality is that unless you're in a really big center where you're only doing dry lab work, a lot of it there's kind of a bit of an overlap. So my project is doing dry lab because I'm far more interested in that, but it's looking at genomics and transcriptomics. But I'm the one that's going and taking the cancer sample and kind of processing it to extract the DNA to then kind of analyze it. Whereas some PhDs, you will already have the data, the raw data there, it's already been collected, already been processed, and you're only analyzing it. So it's really good to kind of explore and tie out what the project will actually entail. And I think that's also why doing pilot work is really helpful, because then you can work out what you actually like or what you don't like.
Wonderful, thank you. We've had a question come through here about duration of OOP-E or OOP-C, so I can maybe answer OOP-E and then Sophie, I'll ask you about OOP-C. So Arav has asked, do these need to be 1 year or are most trusts accepting of 6 months? So for OOP-Es, I think it depends on what you do. If you apply for an established kind of fellowship like the RCP Chief Registrar or FMLM, it will be a 12-month post. The 1 year is usually a maximum, but if you found an opportunity that was 6 months, then there's absolutely no reason from an OOP point of view why you couldn't just take 6 months out of training. So I think just see what opportunities you're interested in what regions you'd be willing to go to, and ask people, what is the duration of the post? Is there some flexibility if you only want to do 6 months? Sophie, how about OOP-C? Were you offered how long are you taking, I guess, number one, and were you offered the option of a shorter time?
Yeah, so as you said, OOP-C is quite a new kind of a OOP, I think. It's not very well known and there aren't that many people who are doing it, but from the people who I've spoken to, so I'm taking a year, but you don't have to take a year. You can take less. I think one of my friends was suggesting to take 8 months to 6 to 8 months, but they ended up going for a year in the end. But they would definitely have less, I'm pretty sure, because they always ask me, are you taking a year or are you coming back sooner? They're desperate to have you back, I'm sure. So I think it's definitely possible to do less than a year, but I just wanted a full year to make the most of it, really.
Yeah, same. And I felt like it took me, I know I'm different because I'm still working in some capacity, but it took me 6 months, I think, to find my feet. So I think a year for me has been a really nice amount of time.
Yeah, and it goes faster than you think. So I definitely, well, personally, I'd recommend a year of an OOP-C. This is your one opportunity to do it, so why not?
Wonderful. Okay, I think if there aren't any other questions come through, we can draw things to a close. Please do email us if you want slides or you want any more information. Otherwise, we look forward to hopefully seeing some of you for next month's webinar. And thank you very much to Karim, Sophie and Ali for sharing their experiences. It's been great.